Hello, hello. Here we are for another episode of The Music of Middle-earth. This is episode 8. Today we get to talk about Mr. Frodo Baggins of the Shire. My name is Jordan Rennells. I'm a musician and teacher. And if you've tuned into the past episodes, then you know that we take a deep dive into Tolkien's work and how we can see those ideas portrayed in Howard Shore's musical themes. One of the most exciting things about going through this process is meeting new musical friends and fans who just love Tolkien and music. I think that Tolkien shows us universal themes of friendship, courage, hope, and beauty. All things that I think make music so powerful to us as well. In doing research for this podcast, I've gotten to explore one of my favorite aspects of any art form, the how did we get here story, the making of, you might say. I listen to audiobooks all the time about things like this, and not just Tolkien related. That's why I especially love the Fall of Gondolin and Beren and Luthien books, as well as the History of Middle-earth series. I've said this before, but I think it's important to remind ourselves as we continue down our roads of Tolkien appreciation that the work that Christopher Tolkien did to allow us to experience and explore his father's work is really a parallel in my mind to Tolkien's own creative vision. It really is incredible what he accomplished, and I'm so thankful for that work. Now, in the last 2 episodes, we've talked about the Hobbits. We talked about where they're from and where they live and a bit of their history. This week we start to get a little bit more specific. Who is Mr. Frodo Baggins, the hero of many of the story? We'll get to explore a ton about Frodo, and we're going to do that through the theme, A Hobbit's Understanding. This is a beautiful theme that actually has 2 different variations, so we'll have a bit more to dive into on this one than normal. I'm pretty excited. This theme takes up elements of the other Shire themes, the pensive setting, the rural setting, and the hymn setting, but we haven't gotten to that one yet. By the way, anyone that's following along in that Music of the Lord of the Rings book by Doug Adams, you'll notice that in a few of these Shire episodes I'm actually swapping the order. That's really just because I want to put In Dreams at the end, and I think it deserves that. I can't wait to get to that, and that's definitely going to be a lengthy episode. That's going to be our first episode that revolves around an entire song, actually. Can't wait. But anyway, let's take a listen to today's theme. So that's the first iteration of the theme, and this is the second one. Awesome. Definitely different, but they're both portraying the same sort of feeling. We'll get to talk about all the details of that later in the episode. And now, as always, time to dig deep. Frodo Baggins, the reluctant hero, as Tolkien scholar Tom Shippey calls him in his wonderful course, Heroes and Legends. If you have a chance to check out this lecture series, it really is great. Tom Shippey is amazing to listen to, as always. Shippey paints the picture of why Frodo is the ideal hero, not just for this story, but for the people it was written for. Those people, of course, would be the people who had been at war. The supposed heroism and glory of war was really no longer there when World War I hit. Death can be dealt at a distance. You didn't even need to be able to see the other person's face anymore. So we find Frodo Baggins, and at the same time Bilbo Baggins, though we won't discuss Bilbo in this episode much, as the unlikely but exactly what we're looking for hero. Though as Shippey says, we didn't know we were looking for him. Frodo is reluctant. He doesn't want to go on this quest. He doesn't want to be the hero. He isn't the brave warrior hero archetype. He's literally too small. As Shippey says, hobbits are very unwarlike. He references the scouring of the Shire, where Frodo says, No hobbit has ever killed another on purpose in the Shire, and it is not to begin now. Frodo's unlike any hero that we know of. He's guided not by his strength or his physical acts of bravery or courage, but his willingness to help his friends, to do what he believes is true and to be right. So who is Frodo? What is he like, and what is he all about? One thing we have to take note of right away is that Frodo is not like the other hobbits. It's easy to put all the hobbits together in one basket, but Frodo himself and Bilbo are very much different from the other hobbits, and we'll see examples of this time and again through the books. I'll start with a few passages throughout the Lord of the Rings. They'll be short, but they'll kind of give us a sense of who Frodo is and how he thinks. The first one comes from chapter 10 of the Fellowship of the Ring, Strider. Aragorn has just introduced his true name after they've heard Gandalf's letter that Butterbur unfortunately had forgotten. There was a long silence. At last Frodo spoke with hesitation. "I believe that you were a friend before the letter came," he said, "or at least I wished to. You frightened me several times tonight, but never in the way that servants of the enemy would, or so I imagine. I think one of his spies would, well, seem fairer and feel fouler, if you understand." This is very early on in the journey, all things considered, so it's interesting to see Frodo already have a sense of the world and those around him. He's definitely way more world-wise, or at least aware of those around him in comparison to the other three hobbits, except maybe Merry. Next I'll go to the passage where Frodo truly takes up the mantle of ring-bearer, and as Shippy says, very reluctantly, from the Council of Elrond. The noon bell rang. Still no one spoke. Frodo glanced at all the faces, but they were not turned to him. All the council sat with downcast eyes, as if in deep thought. A great dread fell upon him, as if he was awaiting the pronouncement of some doom that he had long foreseen and vainly hoped might after all never be spoken. An overwhelming longing to rest and remain at peace by Bilbo's side in Rivendell filled all his heart. At last, with an effort, he spoke, and he wondered to hear his own words, as if some other will was using his small voice. "I will take the ring," he said, "though I do not know the way." Frodo has that hobbit understanding, what's right and good and what must be done. He's a hobbit more wise than any of the others, including Bilbo, and actually more wise than some of the others in this council will find out. It's interesting that in this example, Frodo almost portrays it in a way where he knew this was coming from the beginning. He knew that this would be his task straight from the beginning. At least some part of him, in some layer, he knew that he would have to be the one to make this journey. Now, all the way at the other end of the spectrum, in the chapter Homeward Bound, there's a solemn moment where even Gandalf has no answer for Frodo's question. I'll read from the end of The Return of the King. At last the hobbits had their faces turned toward home. They were eager now to see the Shire again, but at first they rode only slowly, for Frodo had been ill at ease. When they came to the ford of Bruinen, he had halted, and seemed loath to ride into the stream. They noted that for a while his eyes appeared not to see them, or things around him. All that day he was silent. It was the 6th of October. "Are you in pain, Frodo?" said Gandalf quietly, as he rode by Frodo's side. "Well, yes, I am," said Frodo. "It is my shoulder. The wound aches, and the memory of darkness is heavy on me. It was a year ago today." "Alas, there are some wounds that cannot be wholly cured," said Gandalf. "Fear it may be so with mine," said Frodo. "There is no real going back. Though I may come to the Shire, it will not be the same, for I shall not be the same. I am wounded with knife, sting, and tooth, and a long burden. Where shall I find rest?" Gandalf did not answer. Frodo makes the ultimate sacrifice. He gives up his beloved Shire and his quiet life with his friends. He sets out to save the world, even though it costs him his own world. We see his understanding in his beautiful wisdom and words of comfort he gives to Sam at the end of the Grey Havens chapter. We see that he's at peace with his decisions. "Where are you going, master?" cried Sam, though at last he understood what was happening. To the haven, Sam, said Frodo. And I can't come. No, Sam. Not yet, anyways. Not further than the havens. Though you were too a ring-bearer, if only for a little while, your time may come. Do not be too sad, Sam. You cannot be always torn in two. You will have to be one and whole for many years. You have so much to enjoy and to be and to do. But, said Sam, and tears started in his eyes, I thought you were going to enjoy the Shire too, for years and years after all you have done. So I thought too, once. But I have been too deeply hurt, Sam. I tried to save the Shire, and it has been saved. But not from me. It must often be so, Sam. When things are in danger, someone has to give them up, lose them, so that others may keep them. What an incredible passage that is. I really think it shows what an incredible hobbit Frodo is. He starts off somewhat naive at the start of the story. He even thinks that he can hide his plans of leaving from his best friends. As we find out, he does a terrible job and is surprised that they even call him out on it in A Conspiracy Unmasked. But that Frodo grows into someone else over this journey to Mordor and back. The Frodo who's afraid of Farmer Maggot and his dogs is definitely long gone at the end of this story. And I think that that's really the beautiful story and the arc of the whole thing, is Frodo's journey of being an innocent hobbit and going all the way there and back again and having it not be the same, and for us to realize that sometimes people have to give up what they love and what they cherish so that other people can go on. There's that sense of impending fate or destiny and an understanding of that comes with Frodo. I really believe we hear that in this theme and in both of its variants. The great thing that I love about this theme is that pretty much every time Frodo gets to a point of decision making where he has to grow and set out on his own or change his mind about a thought that he had or how he views the world, we hear this theme. A prime example of this is in Moria, where Frodo says that iconic line, I wish the ring had never come to me. I wish none of this had happened. And we get Gandalf's beautiful response to that. So do all that live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to do is decide what to do with the time that is given to us. This theme then swells up behind them. Frodo, though he might not understand fully at this moment, comes to realize that the truth of Gandalf's words, the power of pity to Gollum, compassion, that he must choose what to do with the path laid before him, keeping in mind that subtle element that Tolkien always has at play, fate and or free will. Frodo can decide not to go, which means he can decide to continue on as well, and he definitely does. The same thing happens at the end of Fellowship. As Frodo pulls Sam from the water, he realizes he can't do this alone, and maybe more importantly that he doesn't have to do it alone. Of all the confounded nuisances, you are the worst, Sam, he said. Oh, Mr. Frodo, that's hard, said Sam, shivering. That's hard, trying to go without me and all. If I hadn't a guessed right, where would you be now? Safely on my way. Safely, said Sam. All alone and without me to help you? I couldn't have borne it. It'd have been the death of me. It would be the death of you to come with me, Sam, said Frodo, and I could not have borne that. Not as certainly as being left behind, said Sam. But I'm going to Mordor. I know that well enough, Mr. Frodo. Of course you are, and I'm coming with you. Now, Sam, said Frodo, don't hinder me. The others will be back at any minute. If they catch me here, I shall have to argue and explain, and I shall never have the heart or the chance to get off. But I must go at once. It's the only way. Of course it is, answered Sam, but not alone. I'm coming too, or neither of us isn't going. I'll knock holes in all the boats first. Frodo actually laughed. A sudden warmth and gladness touched his heart. Leave one, he said. We'll need it. But you can't come like this without your gear or food or anything. Just hold on a moment and I'll get my stuff, cried Sam eagerly. It's all ready. I thought we should be out today. He rushed to the camping place, fished out his pack, and from the pile where Frodo had laid it when he emptied the boat of his companion's goods, grabbed a spare blanket, and some extra packages of food and ran back. "So all my plan is spoiled," said Frodo. "It is no good trying to escape you, but I'm glad, Sam. I cannot tell you how glad. Come along. It is plain that we are meant to go together. We will go, and may the others find a safe road. Strider will look after them. I don't suppose we'll see them again." "Yet we may, Mr. Frodo. We may," said Sam. So the ideas we're looking for in this theme are wisdom, elegance, while still hinting at the Hobbit nature of the theme, as well as a bit of maybe impending bittersweet ending. Let's head to our mid-mark segment so that we can jump back into the discussion of these two variants on the Hobbit's understanding theme. Alright, today I'm really excited to have another chance for you guys to hear a little bit of poetry from Tolkien. I'm very excited to have a very old friend of mine and a very great friend of mine, Lauren. We're going to get the awesome chance to hear her version of Galadriel's Song of Eldamar. And this is sung by Galadriel in her swan ship in Lothlorien, in the Fellowship of the Ring. So I'll let Lauren introduce herself and tell you a little bit about what she's up to and what she's been doing. And then you'll get to enjoy her beautiful, beautiful piece of music. I'll let her take it away.
I'm Lauren, and I grew up in Burt's Rapids, Ontario. I started performing locally when I was young, and eventually found my way to Studio 106 in Merrickville when I was 15, where I had the great pleasure of working with Jordan for a number of years. I also have several years of classical training in both piano and voice, but these days I'm focusing more on jazz music and my own songwriting. I'm currently living in Toronto and will be starting my final year of the JD MBA program at U of T in the fall. I grew up loving Tolkien. I read The Hobbit at a very young age and soon after found myself completely immersed in The Lord of the Rings. My love for Tolkien's legends has been a constant throughout my life, and I often revisit the trilogy, the films, and Tolkien's legendarium. Naturally, I was very excited to write a song for the music of Middle-earth. This is my interpretation of Galadriel's Song of Eldamar.
I sing of leaves of gold, and leaves of golden green. Of wind I sing, oh, when there came and in There along the golden leaves have grown upon the branching year, and here beyond the sundering seas, now fall the elven tears. O Lord, in the winter comes, the barren leafless fade. The leaves are falling in the stream. The river flows away. Orient along I upon this hither shore, and in a fading crown of twine, the golden But if of ships I now should see, what ship would come to me? What ship would bear me back across so wide a sea?
So wonderful. When I hear that, it really makes me feel like it's Galadriel herself singing it. So that's really, really great. I'm so glad that Lauren could join us, and I hope you enjoyed it. Now, as always, I want to take a quick moment before we head back to the analysis of this theme to let you all know about the Patreon for the podcast. I have a Patreon account that is steadily growing thanks to all you wonderful listeners out there. If you're interested in helping make the podcast happen, make it grow, and making it better, then go to patreon.com/Music of Middle Earth to see what kind of fun bonus stuff you can get in on. And of course, today I would like to thank our patrons, Chris in Massachusetts, Bonnie in Washington, David in Iowa, and Cameron in Texas for helping make this episode happen. All right, let's get back into the theme. All right, let's check out the two variations of A Hobbit's Understanding. Let's listen to the first one, and then we will do a little bit of analysis, and then we'll talk about the second one later. we have a lot to talk about with these variations. The first thing I want to do is dive right into how this theme compares to the pensive and the rural settings. So for this one, we're here again in D major, as we usually are. And as we listen, I'm sure some of the phrases and the notes are going to be familiar to us from the other two themes. The first thing I want to look at is the contour of these themes. If you were to draw a line through the pensive setting theme kind of arcing up and down, you would end up with 4 sets of rising and falling motion. Let's listen to that so that we can kind of get a sense of what I mean. So it rises up, and then fall, then again, then fall. Up, and down, the final rise, and then the final fall. Now, if we compare that to A Hobbit's Understanding, we actually only have 2 sets of rising and falling. Let's listen to that and keep your ear out for the arc. So we get that rise. Fall. And then the second time up. And then down. So half as many. This is an interesting effect. That combined with the fact that this theme is usually played at a bit of a slower tempo with a more full orchestration, we'll talk about that later on, makes this feel a lot more thoughtful. It feels like our Hobbit characters have grown. We have the same music. We recognize it as something from the Shire, especially with those opening phrases. Let me play those. Get the pensive setting. And the rural setting. And now A Hobbit's Understanding. So we recognize this as the Shire and for our hobbits, but things are slower. The arc is a little bit more complex, still remaining tender and affectionate, as Doug Adams writes in his book. But these characters have grown a little bit by now. Like I said earlier, we usually hear these themes when a moment of growth is happening for mainly Frodo, but we can see it with the other hobbits as well. Another part I'd like to point out about this theme is, again, about the opening phrase, talking about building the character and showing growth. This is a really great literal example of the music growing up and becoming something more. Let's listen to those first 9 notes. It's the same sequence moving through notes up the scale. Same rhythm, but it climbs higher and higher. Really great, I love that. It's taking that same concerning hobbits kind of feel that we know and just making it a little bit more complex. The lines just have more happening through them. That really shows the literal growth of the phrase over time and across the movies. Now, I also find that this theme is interesting because as we compare it to the pensive and the rural setting themes, we notice that those kind of stay in their kind of playful and upbeat style nature throughout, from start to finish. This one starts with a lot of that kind of playful up through the scales, just like in the pensive setting, and a few interesting rhythms like in the rural setting. But by the end of A Hobbit's Understanding, it has become a little bit more relaxed. A great way to show that that wisdom is coming through and that the Hobbit logic and understanding of the world starts to develop through the music. So let's take a listen to the second version of A Hobbit's Understanding. nice. In this version, we get to hear a bit of a different interpretation of that Shire theme that we've explored so far. Now, interestingly, with this theme compared to the other Shire melodies, we actually start on a C instead of a D, maybe an attempt to give this version a little bit more distance from the others. Now, this one has a lot of influence from that 3-note motif that we've been talking about this whole time. I'll just play the full version on piano without stopping so that you can kind of get a sense of it all together. We hear that motif kind of growing and blending through the whole version of the theme. Really, really, really great. Now, I think this is a good chance to actually talk about orchestration. We talked in earlier episodes about the violin and string instruments in general giving things an antiquity, but in this theme we have a bit of a different feel. Now, there are 4 important times that we hear this theme in Fellowship of the Ring, and 3 out of the 4 times we actually hear it as a full string section. So I'm going to talk about that. We'll get into the other orchestrations when we can see them in the scene-by-scene analysis later on in seasons of the podcast, but for now we'll just stick with the string version. So why a string section? In the History of the Ring theme, we had that solo violin playing the melody while we had the other strings accompanying it. This is different though. In this example, we have a more full string section all playing the melody or harmonizing it. The only other thing that's happening most of the time in the examples we hear of this theme is there's a few subtle chords in the background, and those are actually from the hymn setting, and we'll talk about that when we get to that episode. But in most versions of this theme, we hear a more full range of the orchestra flowing through the melody, with a few subtle whole notes in the background on the other strings. I see this as very important to Shore's goal with this theme, to create a sense of understanding logic, Frodo's realizations that this has to be done. As a quick aside, it's really interesting that we don't hear this theme really after we get past the Fellowship of the Ring. Once for sure, maybe twice we hear it again, but by that time Frodo's conflict about his quest is a lot less present. Frodo realizes and comes to terms with the fact that he has to be the one to do this. As we read and see at the very end of the Fellowship of the Ring, Frodo basically knows that he's alone, with Sam of course, and he has to be the one to go on this journey. So it's interesting that the music kind of emulates that by letting those moments of growth happen in the first movie, and then we kind of move past it for the second and the third movie. So let's listen again, and then I have one more thing to explore about these themes. So the last thing I'd like to talk about is really just a quick thing. It's this legato feel that these themes have. All of the notes are held long and full. This provides us with 2 different additions. The first is that the notes come across a lot more elegant. That translates to the growth we've been talking about for Frodo. The playfulness of the Shire has moved on. We get that sense of what Frodo says at the end of the story. Though I may come to the Shire, it will not be the same, for I shall not be the same. The second addition that this legato feel gives us is that the theme kind of creates this foreshadowing for us. I hear it as a hopeful but bittersweet feeling for the future of Frodo. We hope that he can go back to the Shire and that he'll be all right, but the music kind of paints a different picture. He'll still be Frodo, but he'll have moved on. The Shire won't hold the same feeling it used to, and the music can't either. So the joy and the fun is kind of taken out of this version, though we still hear it and recognize it as that Hobbit-esque feeling. Really, really beautiful. So that just about wraps it up for this episode of Music of Middle-earth. Next week we get to hear about Sam Gamgee, Samwise the Stout-Hearted. I can't wait. we'll be looking at the heroic setting theme. Let's have a listen to that. Awesome. I have a lot of favorite characters in The Lord of the Rings, but it is definitely hard not to have Sam near the top of that list. I can't wait to talk about his part of the story. So thank you all for listening. If you have any questions, concerns, ideas, or music of your own that you want to share, then send an email to musicofmiddle-earth-mail@gmail.com, or you can check out the Facebook page and now the Facebook group. We have a lot of cool stuff going on in both of those places, and I do have an Instagram as well. If you're on that, just search Music of Middle Earth. So thank you all again, and I will see you next time.